And I want to talk about Independence Day, give a little bit of history. We should celebrate this day. It's a great day for our country. We know in context and history that the nation wasn't formed for the benefit of African Americans and Native peoples. We know that. But through the work and labor of ancestors and people of goodwill, we were able in time to force people, literally force them to honor the Constitution as not being only for white male landowners, but all people. And all people at the time were only white male landowners. And through the efforts of men like Frederick Douglass and many people, white and black, certainly the nation, the structure was in the Constitution to bring forth a more perfect union. And I believe that to that extent, God was in it. I do have a problem with this notion that we're founded on Christian principles. Because if you know our history, when you found a nation and you decide in the founding for these people to enslave these other people, to own them as chattel property, then how could that be Christian? So we challenge that notion of a Christian nation founding. It's not to say that, like other things in life, sometimes results may come about that serve a better purpose, but you cannot condone the method. In other words, the end doesn't justify the means, and people will still be held accountable for the wrongs and sins they've committed. But that said, we do celebrate here on this day. I want to give you some insight. In chapter 5 of my book, Biblical and Social Justice, What Is It? Chapter 5 asks this question: a nation founded on Christian principles. And we go into some detail. So I encourage you to read that. If you have the book, you can read that. If you don't have the book, get the book and read that chapter. It's a good history. Frederick Douglass said something that is important for us to consider. Frederick Douglass said this in 1845: between the Christianity of this land and the Christianity of Christ, I recognize the widest possible difference. And there's always been people who understood that Christendom, Christianity as a religion, is something different than following Jesus Christ, being a disciple of Christ, and operating with his heart and upon his word. Frederick Douglass knew the difference. Even as a slave, if anyone should have been resentful, should have been him and other enslaved people who could have condemned Christianity and then Jesus along with it. But they had the understanding to know that these so-called Christians aren't behaving as people of God, as Christ followers. And I love this notion that our ancestors knew the difference between false Christians and genuine believers in Christ. And so then and now, we see the difference, don't we? Let's take a look at the formation of the United States of America. Now, the First Continental Congress met in Carpenter's Hall in Philadelphia from September 5th to October 26th, 1774. And all the colonies except Georgia sent delegates. These were elected by the people or the colonial legislatures. Now, again, these are all men. Okay, the people are all men. And by the committees of correspondence of the respective colonies. The colonies presented there were united in a determination to show their combined authority to Great Britain. Now, again, at the time, the colonies were under the dominion of Great Britain. The objective of the First Continental Congress was not to declare independence from Great Britain, which some wanted to do, but to work on issues related to their relationship and the dealings with Great Britain. Due to policies imposed upon them, living under the authority of Great Britain and King George III became untenable. The Second Continental Congress convened on May 10th, 1775, with representatives from 12 of the 13 colonies in Philadelphia shortly after the battles of Lexington and Concord. And again, the War of Independence was already in progress. The Second Congress functioned as a de facto national government at the outset of the Revolutionary War. All 13 colonies were represented by the time Congress adopted the Lee Resolution, which declared independence from Great Britain on July 2nd, 1776. The Declaration was a formal explanation of why Congress had voted to declare independence from Great Britain more than a year after the outbreak of the American Revolutionary War. So the colonies had already decided to break away, become independent on July 2nd. The formal Declaration of Independence was adopted by the Second Continental Congress meeting in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania on July 4th, 1776. July 4th, 1776 was not the formal founding of the nation as much as it was the Declaration of Independence from Great Britain. If you will, it was the formal decision to rebel against Great Britain. And our nation was founded in rebellion. Now, you could argue, is that a Christian principle? And the Declaration goes into detail talking about the reasons why they felt the need to break away from Great Britain. And they cited oppressive policies and such. Well, are those Christian principles? So we're celebrating independence, and in fact, we're celebrating rebellion against the authority of Great Britain. Now, that's something to think about. Certainly, we understand the need in our lives. If someone is abusing you, then you should become independent from them. You should not allow that to continue. Going back to the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s, African Americans were denied equal rights in voting, in restaurants, in schools. And so many of our ancestors rebelled in the sense of doing civil disobedience. Rosa Parks, famous example, she refused to give her seat up and she was arrested for that. There really is no substantive difference between what Rosa Parks did and Dr. King and all the heroes and sheroes of our past in the civil rights movement, what they did and then what the colonies did in rebelling against England for their oppressive practices. So Independence Day really truly is, well, what my British friends call Rebellion Day, okay? The American Revolutionary War was fought from 1775 to 1783, also known as the War of American Independence. It was initiated by the 13 colonies against the Kingdom of Great Britain over their objection to Parliament's direct taxation and its lack of colonial representation. The Revolutionary War was won in 1781 with the help of the French. The Treaty of Paris was signed on September 3rd, 1783, ending the war between Great Britain and the colonies. Following the war, the Constitutional Convention was convened to work on the United States Constitution. The Bill of Rights were the first 10 amendments to the completed Constitution, which was finally ratified on June 21st, 1788. And we have to acknowledge the skill and wisdom and knowledge of those men who wrote the Constitution. It is still to this day a brilliant document. It had foresight. It was something that's held up over the course of time. It required many revisions and amendments to help form that more perfect union promised in the preamble. But again, note that this Constitution was adopted, the nation was formed, knowing that of the 55 framers, 26 of them were slave owners. And that is not indicative of true Christian values. Now, we could say a form of Christianity certainly did condone slavery, but a Christ-loving, Christ-following people would not enslave other people, as many did not in that time. Failing to end slavery as a nation resulted in a future of immense misery, division, and suffering, leading to the Civil War, with 618,000 deaths, as well as many, many maimed from the Union and Confederate side. It's interesting that a candidate for U.S. Senate, Abraham Lincoln, gave a remarkable and prophetic speech in Springfield, Illinois, on June 16, 1858, in which he said this: "A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall. But I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all of one thing or all the other." And that's what he said as a candidate for Senate, prophetically warning that to continue slavery would result in an upheaval, which became the Civil War. So we celebrate July 4th to the extent that the foundation was laid, but it took many labors and many sacrifices to help form that more perfect union, and it's still in progress to this day. So we celebrate this day. Happy Independence Day, America, and we're going to enjoy this day and celebrate. We're going to celebrate the promise that became a reality through the sacrifice and labor of many, many people, our ancestors, and people black and white, who were determined to hold us to a higher standard and to hold us to the promises made in the Constitution. Well, I trust you enjoyed that brief walk through history. And again, you can get my book, Biblical and Social Justice, What Is It? We go into great detail on our national history. It's important to know history to avoid the narratives, the false narratives that go around about our Christian founding. Listen, the real story is far more interesting than the fabrications, all right, and the false narratives. The real story is far more interesting. So please, let's go back and get a clear view of history.